welcome to Modern Philosophy, Philosophy 2230. This is the first of two short video lectures on Immanuel Kant's What is Enlightenment? The very first reading in our required text for the course, the Portable Enlightenment Reader. Let's begin at the beginning here with Kant on page 1. We're going to just work through to the top of page 3 for today, so really just more or less not even quite 2 pages. I'm going to be carefully reading this and discussing this with you in this virtual space. So let's begin at the beginning of this essay. On page 1, Kant opens his essay on the Enlightenment by defining the Enlightenment. So let's just read this. Enlightenment is man's release from his self-incurred tutelage. Not necessarily the most contemporary translation. So Kant's writing this in German in about 1784, as we see from the little italics here above our reading, the introduction. So Kant's writing this several centuries ago in German. And what am I getting at here? Well, for one thing, just don't be fooled by this word man here. He's using the term human being, Mensch. And so enlightenment, Kant is saying, is the human beings. Ausgang in German, release, exit. Human beings exit, release, egress, way out, escape. Enlightenment is the way for human beings to escape or get out of self-incurred tutelage. Tutelage being the English translator's choice here for the German term Unmündigkeit. Unmündigkeit. What the heck does that mean in German? It means the condition of being a minor or not yet an adult, not being in full possession of your faculties yet, not having the mature judgment an adult has, needing, right? And he's going to define this in the very next sentence. So let's just read his definition, right? Tutelage, Unmündigkeit, is the human being's inability to make use of his or her understanding without direction from another. So in other words, this tutelage, this Unmündigkeit Kant is talking about, is the inability to use our own understanding without guidance from others, right? Children are a clear example of this condition of Unmündigkeit, right? Children cannot make use of their own understanding without direction from others. If they do, it's of course incredibly dangerous, right? This is why children are generally supervised by adults. If they're not supervised, they will make use of their own understanding without direction from another. And boy, this brings me back to my childhood in Chicago, where I kind of roamed the city, free range, and would often skip out of class. My friends and I were making use of our own understanding without directions from others in inner city Chicago, and let me tell you, it was not a safe, wholesome environment, to put it mildly. In other words, we needed direction from others. We did not have it, and we were left to our own devices, and that was bad for our development and dangerous for us. Fortunately, I survived. Anyways, right? The Enlightenment, then, as Kant is defining it here, is a way out of self-incurred reliance on guidance from others to make use of our own understanding. Self-incurred. Now, why is he blaming, blaming the victim in a sense? Why is he blaming the person who's not able to use understanding without direction from others? So, certainly it is not the case, right, that it is the fault of children, that they must rely on adult guidance to make a safe and wholesome use of their understanding. And that's a clue that we're not really talking about children here. So in other words, we're talking about human beings, adults. I use the example of children because that's the simplest way to understand this tutelage he's talking about. However, his concern here is with adults who are essentially in a condition, he thinks, like children, though they are adults. Self-incurred is this tutelage. It sounds like we have Yoda speaking here. That's just another archaic translation. This tutelage, this Unmündigkeit, is self-incurred. That is the responsibility and the fault of the individual when its cause lies not in lack of reason, which is the case with children, right? They don't yet have reason and judgment that comes with time as your brain develops more, as you gain more experience, as you learn certain harsh lessons by making mistakes, etc. So the condition of Unmündigkeit, tutelage here, is self-incurred when the cause is not the fact that we're not grown up enough yet to use our minds, but lack of resolution and courage to use reason and our own understanding without direction from another. So that's what he's getting at here, right? The condition of Unmündigkeit is self-incurred when we require the guidance of others for our own understanding, and when we require this because we don't have the resolution, the determination, the perseverance to use our own understanding without direction from others. We also don't have the courage. So lack of resolution, which he will then go on to call laziness. Lack of courage, which he goes on to call cowardice. These are the reasons why most human beings, Kant claims, are in a condition of self-incurred tutelage. Sapere aude, which is Latin here, dare to be wise, literally. Have courage to use your own reason, is how Kant glosses it here. This is the motto, that sapere aude, have the courage to use your own reason. This is the motto of enlightenment. So to be enlightened, then, you must have the courage to use your own reason and not rely on others to do it for you. Laziness and cowardice, Kant goes on to write, are the reasons why so great a portion of mankind, after nature has long since freed them from natural tutelage, natural condition of minority, that is, their bodies have matured, they have become physically adults. Laziness and cowardice are the reasons why so great a portion of mankind, after they have become, right, in the Latin here, naturally, let me see if I can pronounce this, naturaliter majorenes, right, being majors, that is, being adults by nature, right, being natural adults. But yet, nevertheless, right, human beings become adults physically, right? They become able to, pair up with a partner, have children, etc., work, and so forth. However, they nevertheless remain under lifelong tutelage. This is the paradox Kant is trying to unpack and figure out here, right? How is it that human beings who are physically adults remain mentally and psychologically in the condition of minors, right? So why is this, Kant asks? Why is it so easy for others to set themselves up as guardians for these adult minors? Today, for example, right, there's an entire industry, there are multiple industries devoted to shaping, conditioning, and telling people what to think and how to use their understanding to grasp the world around them and what is happening. You can turn on, for instance, if you watch television, you can turn on CNN, you can turn on MSNBC, you can turn on Fox News, you can turn on dozens of channels, right? And there will be not simply reports of the news with reporters telling you what's going on, but also lots of punditry, etc. Lots of people explaining to you, what you should be thinking, what you should be making of a situation that is unfolding, and what you should think of it. In other words, they're there, the experts, to tell you what to think, more or less. And it shows, right? Much of what passes for political discourse in this country, both now and in the past, as long as I can remember, often involves people parroting, that is, repeating, the things they have heard from various media sources. Right? So even when people think I'm taking a political stand, and this is what I believe, well, it turns out, why do they believe it? Because some person at a newspaper or a journal or on a website or in some chat room or whatever has convinced them that they know the truth, and all you have to do now is take what that person has said and repeat it. So, it is so easy not to be of age. That is, it is so easy to remain essentially a child today, Kant writes. If I have a book which understands for me, and today, you can go to the bookstore, you can buy books online, etc., and you can read these books, and they will sort of explain things to you, right? Now you can simply cite and quote those books, and you have an understanding of the world through someone else. But of course, today we have the internet and social media, which have also largely taken on a role like this. So it's so easy not to be of age. If I have a book which understands for me, a pastor who has a conscience for me, a physician who decides my diet, and so forth, right? I have a bunch of experts. Each one can handle different domains of my life, right? And they have all the answers, and all I have to do is turn to them and ask them the questions I have, get guidance from them, and as Kant goes on to write here on page 1, I need not trouble myself. I need not think, if only I can pay. Others will readily undertake the irksome work for me. And the price you pay is not just what you pay to see the doctor, or what you pay in tithing to your church, or what you pay in buying a book, which then helps you understand something, right? Aside from that financial cost, there is also another price you pay, which is that you make yourself susceptible to being manipulated by others when you trust them to provide you with guidance and to understand things for you. Let's continue now. The step to competence. That is the step to maturity, to becoming an adult, not merely physically, but also mentally, psychologically, intellectually. That the step to competence is held to be very dangerous by the far greater portion of mankind and by the entire fair sex. A lot to unpack there. Generally, if Kant says anything about the fair sex, that is, this is a euphemism for women in general, I think we can simply disregard it. However, right, one thing I think he's drawing attention to is that this step to competence, to being able to use your reason yourself, to being able to figure things out and articulate them for yourself, right, with not needing to rely on others. Well, it's held to be very dangerous, Kant is claiming, right? It's by most people, right? And then he says by the entire fair sex. I'm not sure what he's getting at here. He could be saying, he could be claiming, for instance, that he could be claiming that the entire fair sex considers the step to competence to be very dangerous. Why would the entire? So first of all, I mean, this is an empirical claim. I think it's clearly false. Kant has not surveyed the entirety of the fair sex. That is, he has not sent out a survey or questionnaire to all the women on the face of the earth of his time, asking them about this. He's just pronouncing that women in general find women in general, according to Kant, who's not a reliable guide here, believe that becoming autonomous is very dangerous. Why would they believe this, right? If they do, right, in Kant's society, I think this might be a very polite and euphemistic way of saying that it is almost impossible for a woman in the 1780s in Prussia to be taken seriously as an independent thinker. And because of that, then the women in this society, Kant is saying, would be very worried for any woman who attempts to become an autonomous reasoner and thinker, that she will be essentially not taken seriously, dismissed, disparaged, denigrated, and so forth. That's, I think, the best spin, best gloss you could put on this in the absence of additional information. Kant certainly could have included a note here to explain what he's talking about. In any case, my general rule is when a German male philosopher talks about women, we can generally ignore what they have to say. It's not particularly enlightening unless you want to study the history of sexism, and I do think that's where then remarks like this become worth looking further into. Now, what he's talking about here, though, is everyone or almost everyone in his society views the step to competence, in other words, becoming able to use reason on your own, as being very dangerous. Now, And he says, and this is aside from the fact that it's really hard to do. That's one reason not to do it, right? Laziness. It's just too much work. Why should I have to figure all this out? I'll turn to the experts. They'll figure it out for me. Aside from that, though, there's also the question of danger, and that's why he talks about cowardice or fear, right? Why is there this fear? Well, on the top of page 2, Kant remarks, after the guardians, and guardians are anybody who offers to understand for you. In other words, you're looking at a guardian right now, right? And so everything I'm talking to you about with reference to Kant's essay applies to me right now as I explain to you what I think Kant's essay means. But it's justified in this case because I think college students are in a between position between being minors and being adults. I mean, again, biologically adults, but you're still developing your minds. And that's why you're at the university. You still need instruction. You understand this. Therefore, there will be instruction taking place. However, I'm starting with Kant's essay here because I think it's an important point to make here. I will attempt to help you understand texts like this, but at the end of the day, understanding these texts and understanding philosophy and understanding anything at all in general is your responsibility, is something you must do for yourself. People can help you. I can help you. However, you should never become entirely dependent or reliant on any one person to do this for you, this work of understanding. If you depend on any one person, you sort of fall under their authority and potentially under their spell. The idea is something like you can be manipulated and become essentially a pawn of someone else's agenda. On the top of page 2, Kant writes, after the guardians have first made their domestic cattle dumb and have made sure that these placid creatures will not dare take a single step without the harness of the cart to which they are confined, the Gängelwagen. He's really mixing up his metaphors here between domestic animals, and then he brings up this harness, which is literally, it was a device that prevented toddlers from falling when they were learning to walk, right? And of course it turns out, terrible idea, toddlers need to fall and pick themselves back up in order to have proper balance, and if you make it so safe for them that they can never fall, you end up compromising their ability to walk properly. After the guardians have first made their domestic cattle dumb and have made sure these plastic creatures will not dare to take a single step without the harness of the cart to which they are confined, the guardians then show them the danger which threatens if they try to go alone. So let's reduce, let's interpret this in an educational framework. The idea is something like your teachers in K to 12 have conditioned you for a certain kind of education where the instructor provides you with all sorts of information. You then memorize that information and you sort of learn it through repetitive exercises of various kinds, and then you repeat it back. And based on how successfully you repeat back to the instructors what they've told you, right, that corresponds then to your grade and your ability to sort of pass through the various levels. And what this ultimately does then is it conditions students to rely on their teachers, in this sense, guardians in the educational context, to sort of do the work of understanding, and then my role as a student is simply to, is to observe and then copy and replicate it myself, right? So I listen to what the teacher is saying, I write down the notes, that seem important, the information that seems important. I read those notes and I study and I memorize things, and then on an exam or in a writing assignment or in an oral assignment or however, I then show that I've paid attention by sort of repeating back the truth, supposedly, that I've learned, the knowledge I've learned, the true knowledge I've learned. And so ultimately then what this leads to is, right, a sort of authoritarian educational system where students become passive receptacles of information and knowledge, and their job is simply to sort of like sponges, soak it up, and then eventually sort of release it back, display what they have absorbed, and then on, right? And so this really just creates a kind of codependent relationship, you might say, between the teacher and the students. And one thing that doesn't come out of this, according to Kant, right, is the ability of individuals to think for themselves. Instead, what we have are individuals who are able to copy and repeat what they have been taught. And that, of course, copying and repeating what you've been taught over and over again, year after year, really does become tedious after a while, and voila, then eventually, as you get older, you just want to sort of be done with the whole thing and sort of get to the part of your life where you get to make more decisions about what you're going to do with your time. And so you often find people just in a big hurry to be done with the whole thing and just exhausted by it. Now, so guardians then show them the danger which threatens if you try to go alone. So what happens to you if you don't go along with this kind of authoritarian educational setup? Well, you will fail. You'll fail the class. You'll be kicked out of school, etc. These are the worries, the dangers that threaten, right? Now, actually, Kant writes, this danger is not so great, for by falling a few times they would finally learn to walk alone. But an example of this failure makes them timid and ordinarily frightens them away from all further trials. I mean, here's an example from personal experience, right? When I was 18, I did go it alone. I was tired of my high school classes. They were incredibly boring and uninformative for me, and I started taking my education into my own hands, reading on my own, skipping class, and going to the library to read. Of course, I was made afraid at a certain point by the administration of my high school, and they eventually told me not to come back. It seemed like maybe I had failed high school. But as Kant writes, actually this danger is not so great. Here I am, a professor. Clearly I was able to complete my high school education and much more. And it was through experiences like that, right, that I finally learned to walk alone. I became able to educate myself. And I did a great job of that, so that by the time I finally did go into a college classroom, it was just incredibly easy for me, honestly, because I had the ability to educate myself by that point. I cultivated it. Now, an example of this failure makes them timid and ordinarily frightens them away from all further trials. It is true, right? Being threatened with expulsion from high school, being told not to come back to a school because you haven't followed the rules, etc., generally will make people fearful and frighten them away from further trials of their own agency, their own independence in general. For any single individual to work himself out of the life under tutelage, which has become almost his nature, it's very difficult, right? And what I was just describing to you with reference to my own experience in high school, it was difficult. It wasn't easy, certainly, to essentially be told, don't come back to our high school, find another one. He has come to be fond of this state, and he is for the present really incapable of making use of his reason, for no one has ever let him try it out, right? So if we want to start thinking for ourselves, right, the first thing we encounter is just the novelty of it. It's not something that that's really been facilitated in our educational systems or in our public sphere either, right? You generally don't have time and encouragement to sort of think for yourselves. In other words, think about the election right now. Pick sides. There's two sides. There's a crisis. Figure it out, right? But it's one or the other. One or the other, and there is no third option. There's certainly no option of thinking for yourself and coming up with your own ideas. No, you have to choose sides, and that's the end of that. Statutes and formulas. Statutes, not a good translation there. Maxims and formulas. We're thinking of expressions like various sort of proverbs or common sayings. Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. There's one from Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin is full of such maxims. He's also a contemporary of Kant's. These kinds of maxims and formulas, mechanical tools of the rational employment, or rather misemployment, of natural gifts, understanding, reason, are the fetters of an everlasting tutelage, right? So what do people in this condition of tutelage do, instead of think for themselves, they repeat the formulas of the experts to whom they have turned for guidance. And by doing so, they never escape the condition of minority. All right, we're almost there. Let's get through this and wrap this up. I see we're already at 25 minutes. Certainly don't aim to make these video lectures longer than a half hour, so let's wrap this up. So how do people ever become enlightened is one thing Kant is talking about here, right? It's very difficult for an individual to do this in spite of all this kind of social conditioning and authoritarian structure in his society or in ours. And so it rarely happens, but it does happen, right? There are only a few who have succeeded by their own exercise of mind, both in freeing themselves from being in this condition of Unmündigkeit, or incompetence, or minority, or tutelage, right? And in achieving a steady pace. I'm not sure what the heck that's supposed to mean. Again, our translator has done us no favors here. But the idea is something like this. Individuals do become enlightened despite this authoritarian setup. They become enlightened because, right, they have resolution and they are not afraid of the consequences of using their understanding for themselves. Now, the problem, though, of course, is that this is only a small number of individuals in any society, and not the majority, not even close, right? However, Kant says that the public should enlighten itself, that enlightenment should become a general condition, is more possible, indeed, if only freedom is granted, enlightenment is almost sure to follow. So here's Kant's optimism. It certainly looks naive several hundred years later, but his idea was something like this. And I'm going to summarize this and quit reading the text so closely for now, just so we can wrap this up, right? But his idea is something like this, and it's incredibly, I think, it's a beautiful moment in European Enlightenment, this optimism about the future and that things will get better. When you understand all of the religious wars, the conflicts, the displacement of populations, and the violence that preceded Kant's era. However, right, so what is he claiming here, right, is that if only freedom is granted, enlightenment is almost sure to follow. He thinks if you grant people political freedom, the freedom to state their opinion, their beliefs, their views, and to argue for their opinion, their belief, their views with others who may have other opinions and beliefs, if you allow this to happen freely without any form of punishment for people who are not towing a party line, are not agreeing with the president or whatever the person in charge, if you allow people to dissent without punishment or retaliation, then enlightenment, Kant says, is almost sure to follow. So what you need then is just political freedom, right? The freedom to assemble, freedom of speech, freedom of religious worship, and so forth. And if you just allow people to have freedom, political freedom, and to vote and etc., to debate issues and to vote on issues as well, enlightenment is almost sure to follow, right? Now, as he puts it, so let's just recap, right? Bottom of page 2. For this enlightenment, however, nothing is required but freedom. And indeed, the most harmless among all the things to which this term can be properly applied. So we have to pay attention here to how Kant is defining freedom, right? I've called it political freedom. Freedom is a very much abused term today in the United States, and it is used almost mindlessly to mean 1,000 different things to 1,000 different people, and it's very vague, but everybody thinks it's good, and it generally just means something like I get to do what I want. Well, this is not what Kant is talking about here. Nothing is required but freedom, and indeed the most harmless among all the things to which this term freedom can properly be applied. It is the freedom to make public use of one's reason at every point. In other words, I can use my reason to understand anything I like and to take a position about anything I like. There is nothing off bounds, there's nothing out of bounds, there's nothing forbidden for me to use my understanding to grasp and then to argue for or against something potentially. And so if you just allow the public to use their reason at every point, you will have enlightenment. Now there's a problem. We're going to save this for next time, right? There's a problem here, right? Everywhere. So I'll just end on this note, and then we'll carry this forward for next time. The top of page 3, right? And I'll just read this in closing, right? He says, look, all we need for enlightenment is freedom. Political freedom, the freedom to make public use of our reason at every point. I hear on all sides, though, Kant writes, do not argue. The officer says, do not argue but drill. He's thinking about a drill sergeant in the army. But the idea is something like this, right? If you're in the military and you're in basic training, the drill sergeant doesn't want to have a conversation with you or debate, right? Do not argue but drill, right? Do some push-ups. The tax collector, when it's time to pay your taxes, they don't want to have a debate about the justness of our tax system. You either owe some taxes or they owe you some money, but this is not the time to say, I have an opposition in principle to paying my taxes. I don't agree with what the government's doing about X, Y, or Z, and therefore I don't want to pay my taxes. So, the cleric, do not argue but believe, right? If you're going to be in a religious setting. There too, right? There seem to be a restriction on the things you can argue. What can you argue, for instance? Can you take sort of arguments about the existence or non-existence of God from the history of philosophy and literature and bring those into a church setting and freely argue whether or not God exists? Well, right, you might have a religious authority say, look, at a fundamental level you have to have faith here. If you're going to introduce all these different arguments, it's not going to get you anywhere. Here, you should restrict those kind of arguments, forget about them, and believe. So, this is the problem then, right? Everywhere, Kant writes on the top of page 3, everywhere there is a restriction on freedom. And yet, freedom is the thing we need most of all for a public to be enlightened. That will do for now. We'll wrap it up now. This will be the end of our video lecture for part 1 of Kant's What is Enlightenment. And I will see you next time, and we will finish this text up then. Take care.